Welcome to the Men's Lifeline. Today, I got a special guest. I got Jordan Goldstein in the house today. Jordan is a former professor. He's a currently fitness and life coach and the mindset coach of sports and philosophy for tribal training. Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Zach, thank you so much for the warm introduction and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and your audience. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, hey, I've been following you for some time now and see how you went from kind of a little bit overweight, not really know what to do in life, being that professor, wanting to make that impact in students' life to all of a sudden branching out, wanting to do some coaching and getting in shape and through sports, which, as we all know, sports is great when it's done right with friendly competition, gets you in shape and you can find such a amazing community within that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned off the bat, I used to be a professor. I got my PhD in kinesiology in
Hmm.
2016, and I'm not a kinesiologist. I am a sport historian. They just don't let you study sports in the old history departments. They don't let you study much anymore in those history departments, which is one of the reasons why I'm no longer a professor. Um, but I was always drawn to the power of sports in shaping identities. And what sort of drove me to study sport was the connection between like national identity and particular
Hmm.
sports, right? So I live in Canada. Your audience will know we have affinity for one particular sport above all others, which is ice hockey.
Great.
So I was always fascinated by that. So my research was in sort of the connection between Canadian national identity and ice hockey. I taught as a professor sport history, sport philosophy, sport sociology for 7 years before making my magnanimous exit from the academy for reasons we don't need to get into. Um, but suffice to say, I have endeavored really hard to bring what I believe is the most valuable elements of what I used to do in the academy, um, namely turning people on to the subjective and spiritual elements of sport from a philosophic vantage in order
Hmm.
for us to utilize that wisdom to live better lives in the world. So that brought me into the coaching realm, and I've been establishing my own one-on-one and sort of small group coaching platforms and programs over the past year and a half. And over the past, I would say, like 8 months, I've officially joined on as a coach for, there we go,
There you
for
go.
Travel Training, which is an online endurance training team, which hopefully we can talk a little bit about.
Hmm.
Um, but um, Basically, what I do is fitness, life coaching, mindset, performance coaching, and really extracting out deep lessons from different philosophies across the world and from different time periods in order for us to utilize the best of that knowledge to realize the best potential of sports or exercise or physical activity. And that is body, mind, and spirit. So, body is kind of like the surface level. And
Hmm.
where I like to go is to the deep level, which is to the spiritual level.
Okay. So what kind of led you to working beyond just the body, but going towards more that spiritual level?
I would suggest that it's the historical evidence of where sports came from, and then the arguments that the people who have promoted sports as a positive activity in our society have generally leaned on. All right. So, sports, and when I say sports, I just mean like athletic competition.
Mhm.
Um, and that is just like seeing who can run fast, to see who can run fast, right? So it's not like
Right.
the winner of the race is going to become the general or the king or the leader of the country, which has definitely been the case. And physical tests and physical contests have always had a kind of a utilitarian link to it, and you won't find a culture or society that doesn't have some sort of a physical test um,
That's
that's
a good
then
point.
going to lead to like authority or leadership. But what makes sports different is that it's not the direct utility; it's more of a tangent. And the reason that we do sports is to bring about the best of ourselves And that might make me a better leader. It might make me a better artist. It might make me a better philosopher,
Mhm.
whatever sort of individual to me. And so the ancient Greeks, the ones who gave us athletic competition for its own sake, used them as religious festivals to praise and to honor their most important gods. So sports are these religious activities, but their nature has been shrouded by their history. And when I look at, and this is sort of what sparked in my mind as a
Mhm.
professor, teaching these things. And my favorite class to teach was the first year. We called it the womb to the tomb course, which is like the very beginning to the very end.
Oh, okay.
So starting with like the persistence hunt out on the savannah, effectively as like the physiological adaptation for us to become excellent long distance runners as a mechanism of survival, all the way to whatever happened last week in the world of sports. And in that class, it's for somebody like me, it was pretty obvious to note that when athletics were utilized to what I think they're towards their greatest potential, we see an immense amount of societal flourishing when it comes
Okay.
to liberty in individuality. And so like the two most, I would say, sport loving societies in the world, the ancient Greeks and the Victorian British, right? They're the ones who I think most practically utilize sport.
Okay.
And
How
it's
do they
no
utilize sports?
as this means of individual character development.
Okay.
Now, not like solely, but this was their rhetoric. This was the aim, right? So a lot of the aim, a lot of the actions fall short of the aim, but that's the idea. The idea is that we aim ourselves through sport to become the best people that we can. I'm sure if your audience knows of the term like the amateur athlete, right?
Yeah.
That comes from the Victorian Brits, and
Oh,
the amateur is the one who plays for the love of the game for the right
mhm.
reasons and never tries to get an advantage over their opponent and submits to the rules and wins with honor, loses with grace, that type of thing. Never receives money for their performance, those types
Okay.
of things. And they believed that they were the inheritors of the classical Greeks for many, many reasons. And this revival of sports and games, a sporting and gaming culture, um, was one of the reasons why the British eventually, ruled
Mm.
25% of the world's population at one point during the 19th century. And sports were one of their gigantic cultural um, exports around the world. So the sporting culture that we have today, it's largely a British sporting culture, which is a sort of like a revivification of the ancient Greek culture.
Hmm.
And just as a historian who likes the broad view of sport and who studied that amateur period in the sort of mid to late 19th century, it just struck me that we can take the best of those ancient traditions and maybe not in a large societal wide manner refine it, make it better, right?
Mhm.
Because the classical Greeks and the amateurs, they all had the same problem. They had this lofty ideal for what sports should be in society. And lo and behold, it didn't really come true in either of those societies. Sports became
Okay.
this debauched or demoralized activity that
Hmm.
a lot of people will look to and say, "Hey, that does more bad in society than it does good." Um, but that's an issue of scale, and that's one of the things that I'm working on in creating my own philosophy, which is effectively trying to pick out the best parts of all these different traditions from the West and from the East as well, um, and really give individuals and small groups a chance to really live sports to their fullest potential. Because once it gets too big, just like any other human activity, it's like you can't be nothing that humans do is perfect.
Right.
um, yeah.
Well, especially with how much people get what we use with passion, how much they get passionate about sports and wanting their team to win, and if their team doesn't win, not good.
Yes,
Or as you kind of allude to, when it gets too so big and to even when it gets more like involved with sometimes with government, how some players they feel like they have to win or they're letting their country down. I mean, we have the Olympics coming up.
that's right. Yeah, there's it. What it, and it's not to say that that's necessarily bad,
Right.
but is it the best? Probably not. And that's sort of my distinction is I'm looking for the best. I want the best understanding so that individuals can use that to live their best lives. Because ultimately that's what sports are for. They're these tuning mechanisms for the human body, spirit, and mind to all come into focus together. And we get to do that through our honest effort, which there are not many things in the world that have that much honesty at their center and that we can tangibly feel and
Mhm.
then realize in sort of a lot of the actions in our lives.
No, that's a good point. So, what are some philosophies that you take that you're trying to make your own, so that way you kind of take segments of whether it be Plato, Aristotle, or just to name a few? Maybe you can tell us about one we may not have heard of.
um, I would say my two biggest philosophical inspirations would be like, yeah, Aristotle. He's the big one for me from classical Greece. Plato's pretty
Mhm.
important, although I'm much more of an Aristotelian. And then I would say from the East, I'm really interested in merging some of the Taoist
Okay.
ideologies of Lao Tzu. So if
Mhm.
anybody's read the Tao Te Ching, um, there's a lot of intriguing there's a lot of intriguing similarities between those two philosophies, but they are different. And I find there's an intriguing nexus between them when it comes to our own individual action and the way in which we as individuals interact with sport. Um, One of the concepts that I think I'm most interested in highlighting is this idea of sort of love or joy or passion or interest. So for me, when sport works at its best, it's attached to something that you love. And that is in a bunch of different ways. So, first off, there's the love of motion. So, there's an
Mhm.
athletic, we'll call it a movement pattern. Like I love trail running. You might love
Right.
swimming or mountain biking or tossing the football around or whatever. Maybe it's even like casting a deep ocean line, like whatever it is. There's some motion that when you're doing it, you are engrossed in it. It it speaks to you, right? You have a
Right.
passion for executing it well, and then acquiring even more skills so that you can do it even better, right? So Aristotle tells us that when we find an activity like that, right,
Yeah.
we need to aim at it, right? Because we're being essentially led by the soul, and that's part of like our individuality, right? Like what I'm drawn to is not what you're drawn to, Zach.
Okay, I see what you're saying about the individuality now.
Yeah. We're all
Definitely making
interested
it
in
there.
different things, and where do our interests come from? Like sometimes they come from the outside. Oh, I was born in a particular culture, and that culture does stuff like this, so there I do that. But then even we all know that yeah, you tell me to do this thing, I don't really enjoy it, and the only reason I'm doing it is because there's everybody's doing it and there's pressure.
Right.
But if I could just choose the one thing that I would do something else because I'm actually much more interested, right? So there's this interest sort of leads us. And there's this notion that when we are engaged in some sort of a spiritual practice, um, it's like the past and the future dissolve, and we're just ensconced in that present moment.
Sure, that's
Um,
why a lot of people
and
can feel that connection to nature when they're en entwined to it. And I
yeah,
know you just quoted, like, Lao Tzu.
yeah, I didn't even get to Lao Tzu yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that idea. It's anything that sort of humbles you in the present moment to your finitude. Or another way to think about it would be something in the present moment that reminds you of the corporeal reality of your body. And corporeal reality is this fancy word for just meaning like the body in motion in life, like that we actually live in these bodies, right? Like we're animated, we're animated through them. And so sports is this obvious powerful place where we feel viscerally in the body with our effort in terms of like the sweat or the muscle strain or the heart
Right.
rate, right? Or even like the physical injury that comes with missing a step. um, so there's this reality and honesty of sport that when it's linked up with our passion, and Aristotle tells us that any activity can become a moral activity if it's related to this passion that we
Hmm.
have. Um, the word he uses is eudaimonia, which is like the highest good that's attainable for any individual. So that's the
Okay.
highest good for your life or for my life, not for general person's life,
Right.
but actually for Zach Goodman's life or for Jordan Goldstein's life, like for that at that individual level. And when we twin that up with what's called ontology, which is like our internal desire for
Hmm.
excellence and achievement, which is kind of like the spirit drives for perfection. It's like, well, why do you want to sit and work on maybe like a hobby is a really good idea. Is a really good example of this. So, people have like model trains or like
Right.
they do woodworking. And it's like, well, you don't sell the model train set, or you don't like you gift away the bowls like or the cutting
Hmm.
boards that you make. Why do you continue to do it? It's like, because I want to get better. I want to make the best. I want to make better cutting boards. I want more detailed model trains, right? It's like the spirit just wants it to be perfect, right? um and as I mentioned, the human world is not perfect, so the spirit
Right.
sort of wants to elevate above those temporal limits. So when we combine those two things, the highest good that I can aim at, which is related to my interests, and this internal desire that I'm just going to do it just because, that activity becomes a moral activity because it's bringing out the best of my character, and then it's displaying it for other people to know me by and to become inspired by. And that's very similar to a lot of the Tao in a sense, where we are effectively, instead of in the West, which is like straight line answers, the East is all about making sense of paradoxes and understanding how things just circle through and flow through. So one of the great Tao concepts that sort of maps up with this idea of like just like love of motion,
Hmm.
would be this idea of Wu Wei, which is effectively effortlessness. But it's effortlessness that comes about through discipline and attention to detail and training, plus an internal understanding of the whatever activity that you're engaged in. So for me, let's use a trail running example because I'm a trail runner.
That's right.
Effortlessness is like flow. That's literally like my legs are running and I'm seeing the steps 8, 9, 10 ahead, where I've got to
Oh, well.
shift in between rocks and roots and uphills and downhills and slight turns and sharp turns, right? And I'm not thinking about any one individual step. My eyes and my feet are effectively doing all that automatic processing for me. And I'm just kind of like along for the ride. And maybe I even catch air and I feel that like weightlessness.
Oh, wow.
And now it's really like maybe for like a second. If you're, if you're running fast down a hill and you decide to jump, so because you got to get over a rock, like you will
Right.
catch air. It's,
Oh, absolutely.
it's just for about a second, but it's real. You will feel it. You will feel
Well,
flying.
especially if you get so much in the present that you can feel that air, you can feel that movement and everything like that. And that's kind of a cool way of describing effortlessness is because you practice, you've been disciplined, and you put so much work into it that for you, it's like automatic.
Yes. It's like a muscle memory that's related to your heart because you're enjoying it, the thing that you're doing so much, right? So it's like this twinning. It's this twinning of discipline and, again, understanding, right? And I'm not going to be able to deeply understand any activity if I don't have a desire, if I don't have a
Mhm.
passion, right? And that's also matches up really nicely with Aristotle, who says aim directly at the nature of the activity to extract the most value out of that activity. So then it's like, okay, well, what are sports? Well, as I mentioned earlier, sports are then these religious activities. Well,
Right.
I got to go right at the center of that. I can't just be on the periphery and thinking about the body only, which is the fitness world, which is great. We need people to talk to us about physical health, right?
Right.
And about doing exercises correctly so that we don't get injured, and what's better for upping my VO2 max or like my muscle hypertrophy or any of that stuff.
Mhm.
But that's not the heart. That's not the center of sport. That's like the outer crust. Like that's like the superficial layer. What's really going on in the center is this spiritual transformation of, resistance,
Mhm.
adversity, faith, overcoming, action, transcendence, again and again and again. And that doesn't just happen spiritually or mentally, that actually happens physiologically too. If you think about the way muscles break down and build up in terms of
Right.
like what you put the stress on under a heavy barbell or something like that, right? You got to break them. You got to break them in order to build them, and that's just sort of more about the reality of what's going on in sports, and it's not just it's something that happens all up and down that chain.
No, I really like the way you describe it because we always know that for as long as I've studied, in my case, psychology, that to really take care of oneself, you really have to focus on the body, mind, and spirit. And that's always been focused on. However, I think the one piece that gets forgotten is the how and the why. So we'll really go to the how, sorry, to the why, to the what, to the how. And we kind of need to I like how you put it as a crust, right? Okay, so we got to take care of our bodies, right? We got to eat healthy, drink our waters, and do things like that. Then we got to practice the mind. So it might be reading and studying. And then really the spirit is really that trial and testing out, like you said, building that resilience. So really for people to understand like what everything you're doing is to take care of yourself because it's not easy to take care of oneself.
Correct, right? There's another philosophic idea that sort of undergirds all this, and that's this idea of embodiment, that we are bodies and minds combined.
Hmm.
Or you might we might think about it, it's like the body is not more important than the mind, and the mind is
Right.
not more important than the body. They're co-equal, and you throw the spirit in too, and it's like, well, these are all independent, codependent parts of me that are all equally important, but maybe not in the exact moment, right? So maybe there are times where I need to just focus on the body, and maybe
Hmm.
there's times where I need to overemphasize the mind or overemphasize the spirit, but that's in one particular context. In the overall scope of my life, they're all equal, right? Um, and they should all work in harmony together, as opposed to the mind being elevated over the body, for example, which is one of the places where we live right now, with sort of like the rational mind being the most
Hmm.
important place of truth. Um, and one of the ways you could understand this as a psychologist is like, well, what's a more popular diagnosis for somebody with a mental health issue? Is it physical exercise? Is it walking in nature? Is it getting sunshine? Is it taking care of physical health, making sure you get enough sleep?
Right.
Not as much as, say, go to therapy, talk, and maybe take a pill that's going to affect your brain chemistry, right?
Right.
Like the mind, and that's just in so many different ways you could see that played out. Um, but it's not a given that we operate with a philosophy that these things should be balanced off against each other. A lot of philosophies, or a lot of worldviews, right, historically have had one part over the other, not necessarily together.
That balance.
Yeah.
So how do you bring that balance then to a smaller community? Since, as you alluded to, we need to focus more on smaller, not necessarily the larger community of, having a whole societal, let's say, change, right? And that way we can make more of an impact in our smaller community. So how do you take all these like lessons and everything that you learned over the years that you're still learning and studying from history, from Lao Tzu to Aristotle, and how you taking them into the tribal training community?
Mhm. Well, that's a particularly interesting story. I'll just back up a bit in terms
Hmm.
of like what tilted me towards coaching. Like when I was a professor, I wasn't interested in writing and researching and giving papers to my peers.
Ah,
That's kind of like an exercise in futility. Spend all this effort to write a paper that 10 people are going to pretend that they read, just so that they can everyone can feel smart about themselves, right? But
Find that one quote, then you can cite it.
nobody reads those journal articles. Nobody reads those journal articles. I have like I have a monograph. I have a written book that's just myself, right? A solo authored academic published book. I'm sure that nobody in my field has cracked past like the 20 pages of it. You know, like
Oh,
people
wow.
don't read the people who should read these things don't even bother to read them. So then it's like, what does a normal person think about this research? It's like, and some research is really good. Some research is like, you know, it transforms millions of people's lives and helps them. And the people that are engaged in that, hey, you go for it. This sport history research, like
Mhm.
you really got to squint hard to see the giant impact you're making with your very small niche article about something that happened in the 1920s or whatever in a community that nobody even knows about, even if they are expert sport historians, right? So for me, it's like, well, what's the value of teaching? Well, that's dealing with students, that's helping students, right? And that's opening them up to sort of critical and independent thinking, but also guiding them, right? Guiding them just in the journey of life. And I mentioned I loved my first year course and I loved talking with the first year students and the second year students the most, which sort of also made me a bit of an anomaly at the university because most profs just look at those students as an imposition onto their brilliance. um, so for me, it was like I wanted to recreate the magic that I had in those office hours. You know, like when the student wanders into the
Yeah.
prof's office and they're a little bit like worried and they're just like, where does this guy's office even? He's like at the back hall in the
That's
corner, and
happened
there
to me
might
a few times.
oh my gosh, there might be some like cobwebs, it looks like on the ceilings, and there's just like stacks of books everywhere. And it's like this guy's kind of wild, and I just want to ask him about my essay or whatever it is. And he ropes you, you know, that professor ropes you into like that 45-minute conversation that ends up being one of the most impactful things that even happens to you at university. And like that was me. I actually had that office at the back of the corner, like all the way hidden with the stacks of. I was that guy. I
So
just
people
didn't
to
have
really go search you out then.
I didn't have the gray beard yet, but I was getting there for sure. So
Ah,
I was that guy, and I had those conversations, and I loved that, and that's where I felt I was making the biggest impact. So that led me to one-on-one coaching, where it was simply just, hey, you lack motivation to stay fit, or you lack sort of like the internal discipline to maybe like live by your higher qualities.
mhm.
Um, let's use the honesty of the of physical activity, number one, to untangle some of the mental things that trip you up. But number two, like if you're having trouble with this fitness consistency, let's turn on that passion and let's use that spiritual center of sport to figure out a way for you to make it fit.
Hmm.
So that's why it's kind of like life and fitness coaching in one. It's not really like one or the other. It's kind of
Right.
like both, depending on the individual, which angle they need it from. And then that led me to Coach Ryan Dreyer, who's the I'm all off here.
There you go. Now you got it.
Yeah, it's like a mirror, you know. I'm
Yeah,
totally
I do it all
um,
the time. Don't worry about it.
um, who's the founder of Travel Training, and he had gone through an immense personal discovery journey of self improvement and self development through endurance sports. We run in the same social media circles. We actually have the same business coach, and we just hooked up on a connection call. And he just through the course of the conversation, he just realized like, I need you. It's like you have the information that I need so that I can tell other people what happened to me and I can teach them and I
Mhm.
can form my emerging training team around those deep and powerful ideals. So he reached out, I consulted him on how to think about some of these philosophical ideas and the historical evolution of sport. We use that to sort of create these philosophic pillars of endurance training. And we went sort of back and forth in terms of some team building stuff, some course building ideas, some training ideas. Um, and then he sort of just like brought me on to be the tribal prof, which is sort of like my official role. So I'm sort of like, I guess, a mindset a performance coach
Mhm.
for a lot of the athletes, where we won't necessarily talk about physical training, but we talk about perspective, how to approach physical training, how to think about competition, how to extract out the values uh, of our training. We have a really thriving community that's built around diving deep into these ideas. We have an entire monthly sort of like call schedule that starts off with a exploratory podcast with Ryan and I, where we just talk about ideas that are kind of alive in the tribe,
Mhm.
um, that we sort of unearth through our conversations with athletes. And then we have an open discussion forum where then we get to drill down into how that's working in each individual's lives, like whoever wants to come onto the call, and then we just sort of share and collaborate. Um, and really just about filling that team with this almost like this spiritual energy of why we are all doing this and why we're all doing it as a form of effectively character development. You know, one of my
Mhm.
tags for the team is we're a personal development club that masquerades as an endurance training team. Like we do the
Right.
training, we throw down, we race. We just had an epic weekend on the team. We had we have a guy in Australia. He took down his first 100K
Oh,
ultra
wow.
race. We have Louis, the OG, who took down the Vermont 100 miler, which is a race he'd been gunning for like many years, and he crushed it. We have five
Wow.
athletes. We had five athletes do the Oregon 70.3 on Sunday, and they all killed it, like incredible performances. And then we had one of our members who's been working about maybe like 2 years or so to become an Ironman. He did Lake Placid Ironman, and that was just literally 2 days on the weekend. And
Oh, wow.
we got people doing races every weekend. And I would suggest the thing that elevates the team is that it's a real team.
Mhm.
Yeah, we all live in different places, but
Right.
it's like a real team. And we have these team events where it's 10 plus athletes all at the same competition. Um, and that's like the magic, because one of the big powerful draws of sports, and particularly I think for men,
Mhm.
is being part of a team where we all pull together and we all are forced to struggle and sacrifice brings out character traits that we don't get to display in a lot of other arenas in the modern world. You know, if you think about the vast majority of human history, what have men been doing? It's like organizing into hunting parties or soldier or,
Right.
you know, or into, like military units, and then going off and doing the stuff like the adventuring and the killing and the dying and all those things. Right. So
Right.
we, we feel at peace struggling together and allowing the better parts of our character, like bravery or courage or leadership, right, or sacrifice, to come through in these sort of difficult moments. And in the modern world where comfort is, all around us, and let's just say thank you for all of that. Like that's what allows you and I to talk. uh,
Exactly.
right. Like, so we're not saying that the modern conveniences are a bad thing, but
No,
they
not at all, but it's the lessons that we've learned that we've forgotten, right? Like working together, struggling together. One thing you see a lot is a lot of men will sometimes bring each other down and it, kind of mock them, but not in a way like we're all struggling. This, you get this nickname because you've earned that right. And we all had that terrible nickname at the beginning, but that's to see how do you respond to it. Do you just laugh about it and, work and struggle, then you get a better nickname later on, or do we know that you're just going to be a complainer and that's all you're going to do?
Exactly. And you see this really with one of what you sort of alluded to earlier, with sort of like one of the negatives of sport, and particularly modern sport culture, is that men are doing this, they're just not participating. They
Hmm.
are just wearing the colors of a team with the name of another man on their back, right? And
Right.
that's how they organize themselves into these camaraderie groups or these struggle groups. And it's like, I'm not against fandom, and I actually have quite a respect for the fanatic who's like super
Sure.
passionate about their team and who can put it in the correct box and in the correct container. You know, when the whistle's over, I'm not passionate to the point where I'm going to break my TV or sob for a week if my team loses. But, you know,
Right.
I would much rather somebody who's animated and interested and like invested in watching a game than someone who's just it's on and there's a distraction. And I'll scroll my phone and I'll hit some prop bets, and it's just like this form of just mindless entertainment. I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. And if that's you, like everybody needs some entertainment. That's great, but you're taking something that's up here and you're moving it down here.
Right.
Like if you're a fanatic and everybody knows this, and you maybe even been this person, like the last word you would use when you would observe a fanatic watching their team is entertaining. Like they're not being entertained, they're in it. Like they're
Exactly.
up, they're pacing, they've got like the pit in their stomach. Like there's this uncertainty, they're like, I'm in it with you in some sense. Like my reputation's on the line, like my emotions are on the line. Like
Mhm.
it's not the same, but at least that person is trying. But that's also only enhanced if you're also doing it yourself, right? That's the point. It's like we should watch sports to be inspired to do them, or to go off and go after a big achievement, right? Like
Right.
that's the spectating power of sports, which is why I think people should watch sports. They should watch the sports that they love, and they
Mhm.
should do it with passion, not just like turning on whatever game is on just so I can zone out, right? Um, so that's really the most powerful element of a real team is you feel, and I know this for me, and I know a lot of people on team feel this way. It's like the first time since you were like maybe like a teenager, right? Like when we did a team race, we did our first team ultra in Zion National Park in
Mhm.
April. Our goal was 10 athletes at the starting line, a 100-mile trail race, 10 athletes going through the course together, and 10 athletes finishing together.
Nice.
Um, we did not accomplish that. I would encourage, if you're interested in that story, we have maybe like 10 plus hours of podcasts, way more than 10 plus hours, sorry, like 20 hours of podcasts
Mhm.
on the travel training podcast, where each individual athlete actually has their own podcast. So all 10 athletes have their own individual story. Plus, we've got a race recap. Plus, we've got like, so there's tons about the story. And I would encourage anybody, that would be the best way to learn about our team. Let's go and consume those podcasts. You'll know what we're all about from that story. Um, but it's like
Yeah,
you're
we'll put in
staying.
the link in the description below so that way
Yeah,
people can have access to that.
that's awesome. Thank you. But it's like we stayed in the house for 3 days before the race all together without like our families or our kids, and we're all wearing the same gear, and we're all like prepping
Nice.
our drop bags together and going to the race together, and everything there is about like forging relationships and throwing down in the desert. You know what I mean? Like everyone's there for business. And it's like those travel tournaments that you used to go on as a kid. And it's real. And you don't just say goodbye forever after the race. It's like, well, now we're going to talk about it. Now we're going to reflect. Now we're going to allow space. One of the things that happens for people who do this stuff alone is like you do the race and then you crash. Right?
Right.
The post race blues because you work so hard for something, you achieve it, and then
Right.
it's like go back to Aristotle. It's like, what is happiness? Happiness is working towards the goal, right? Happiness isn't the goal, and you would know that from a psychology lens as well.
Mhm.
It's like people are the happiest when they're on the up of the curve. Sorry, I'm just so bad
Right.
with this mirror stuff. When they're working towards it and they see themselves accomplishing the steps in order to get to where they want to go, it's not like the goal. The goal isn't the thing that makes it feel good. It's like there's this weird thing that happens. I remember getting my PhD, and it's like this thing I worked for 4 years, but I dreamed about for so long. My whole university career and even my high school had been aimed. So it's like 15 years of aiming here. And you're waiting outside that room after you've done your 4 hours of grilling with your committee, and they bring you back in, and it's like, congratulations, like you passed, you did a great job. Like then
I
they
think they
walk
have
out.
a little bit of a more celebratory. I mean, you just spent 4 or 5 years going through
Literally.
dissertations and
Yeah.
everything, and it's just like,
Yeah.
"Yep." You've been passed. You've been
It's
approved.
literally like 2 minutes, and then they got the 2 minutes, and they all walk out, and you're left standing there, and it's like, am I a doctor now? Is that it? Like, what do we do? Do I just wait until June? Because I passed my gestation thing was in my defense was in December, and I didn't convocate until June. So it's like, so what do I do in this weird pit? Am I a doctor? Am I not a doctor? Like, what is this? Like, because there's no finality. It's just sort of like,
Oh,
oh,
jeez.
but that's the thing, right? And even on the team, it's like people do these giant things and then they get down. But like we have this community where we all understand it, and then we pick that
Hmm.
person up, or you get onto a call with the prof, and then we go through it. We go through the subjective elements that are related to sort of like your individuality, where you were, what you were looking to get out of the race, like keeping you on focus. Um, the thing with the tribe is that we focus on the subjective over the objective, but we don't
Hmm.
ignore the objective. So it's like we want to race, we want to get better, we want the training to humble us, we want the honesty, right?
Right.
If you and again, it's like as a psychologist, you would know this and appreciate this. It's like if I want to go on a personal development journey, if I want to develop parts of my character, honesty is the most important thing I can bring with me.
Well, they always say it's honesty is the best policy.
And
I
what's
know it's a
more,
cliche, but it's so true. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself, and that's just being honest. And again, more so focus on a little bit more the positive because a lot of people go like, "Well, I'm a terrible person. I've been like this way for like let's say 20 years," and they dilute or they miss the importance of really that being proud of themselves for recognizing they have a challenge, but also where have you won in life at times? And the more I read, the more I study, it's more of look at the results. If you're not getting the results you're getting and desiring, that's kind of fine because a lot of people don't take time to define what they want to go after or they don't define happiness. Then they don't always look at what systems are they using to implement. So the more I learn and study and the more I learn from you and today, like from it coming from more of like a spiritual aspect, from it really taking care of everything and an equal as equal can be basis, but also having that camaraderie of, 10 guys started. Typically, people say, I want to be the first one. Your whole focus, your whole mission was, I just want to see these 10 guys cross the line. That's all I want to see. So you're setting them up for that success by saying, we're not looking for the fastest time. We're not looking for the first in first place. We're looking that we all can cross together. And then from there, we'll introspect, we'll look within ourselves. Where can we improve? Where can we do better? Where did we do better?
yeah, like the big words for us on competition day, it's like competition is a celebration.
Hmm.
Um, it's a celebration of all the work and the transformation that you've done in the training. Like the training is the thing that should transform you. It's not the race. The race is the realization. And that's like the feeling of transcendence or the moment of transcendence. But that doesn't happen without the months and months of preparation, that the diligence and the discipline and the adversity of the training forges like that new person out of you. Um, if you smash your PR in like a triathlon, right? But whatever, if you're doing an Ironman, you shave off an hour of your Ironman time, but you became an absolute jerk in the process. It's like we'll kick you out. We'll kick you out of the team. It's like we don't care about your time if it made you a worse person. Like
Hmm.
the best stories in our tribe is people who didn't finish the race, but then who used that as motivation to become better individuals who then went on to conquer that same race. You know what I mean? Like they didn't let the initial adversity get to them, and they endeavored to use that as a lesson to become better, and not just a better athlete, but like legitimately like in their characters, using it as a
Right.
form of character growth. Those are the things we celebrate the most. Yeah, we love the PRs, we love the times, and as we all continue to grow together because it's a team and people on the team are going to be on the team for like years and years and years, sort of thing. It's like just eventually the body will catch up to what we're doing in the mind and the spirit because these are just normal people. It's people who are looking to, oh, I want to take down like an Iron Man, but I don't really know how to do it right now. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
go from on the couch to 70.3 and then an Iron Man in like 18 months. there's still a lot of physical gains left on the table, and
Right.
we'll start to push up into the higher echelons, the people who just continue to train and train and train. um, but it's part of the process. For us, the process is the thing that matters, and we just use the objective results as a calibration tool. So it's like if I'm training and I'm not getting faster, something is wrong. So I got to
Yeah.
recalibrate the training, right? Or if I aim to do this and I didn't meet it, okay, well, we go back to the drawing board. That's that honesty, right? That's that honesty that we need. And the body provides us with an honesty that the mind can't rationalize away, can't backwards justify. That's the power of the mind. And you know that, trying to untangle the knots that people tie inside their own brains,
Yeah.
um, where it's just ephemeral. Like when we're talking about the realm of ideas, this is some abstract world. I can't touch it. It's not tangible, right? So whenever I'm just inside of my mind, I'm swirling around and there's no corporate reality to anything, because it needs to be made real through action, right? Like
Yeah.
thoughts must be realized in the sense of real through the world through action. And that's what sports and physical activity and exercise does. It forces us to do stuff in the world that we then experience, that becomes a part of the honest appraisal, like of our lives, and it becomes honest data and honest information that we can go then back up and say, hey brain, the one that's this trickster, the one that creates all the shortcuts,
Yes.
get yourself out of the fact that you got to sprint 200 meters 10 times today on your track session. And how are you going to feel about that? You're going to feel bad. Your lungs are going to hurt. Like, you just can't ignore that. But
No.
you get this sense of conquering. You get this sense of, I overcame adversity. I actually did something. And then this gives you like a sense of who you are that can't be taken away. And when we're talking about personal development or identity construction, it's like these are the real foundational building blocks that you require in order to build like the house of yourself on something that will last, and that won't just be won't be just like swept away. um so there's a real power in utilizing the physical training in this fashion.
No. It seems like your group has taken a lot of time to really kind of find your own identity within the group too. What are you going to accept and not accept? Like, we're going to accept that you're going to get better. We understand it's going to be terrible. We understand it's going to be hard and painful, and you're going to want to quit. We'll be there to support you, help you out. But at the same time, if you start demoralizing other people, if you start putting others down and become a jerk in the end, then, well, guess we're going to have a serious conversation. This is the right group for you, because kind of thinking about what you alluded to with like amateur, loving the game, loving the sport, and that professional, where it gets a little bit more, I would say, isolated. Because I remember hearing Kobe Bryant talk about him being the top, right? Don't talk to me. I'm going to put on basically like Mike Myers type of music or something like that. He would talk about just giving to that mentality of, going out doing his thing. But he said everything's going to, family relationships, cousins, oh, it's going to suffer because I want to be the very best. I mean, but he's still there for obviously he's still there for his kids, but just in that mentality from what different groups and different energy levels and different levels of intensity.
Yeah, the reason why an athlete becomes a role model, or that they become an inspiration, is because they show us a proper, I guess, example of sacrifice, right? Like,
Mm,
and that's what tilts us again back towards like the spiritual realm. It's like, well, what am I willing to give away, and what in order
right.
to achieve what? And the athlete, like the elite athlete. So this is not the ordinary. Another thing. This is not an ordinary person. Kobe Bryant's
No.
not ordinary. He's not like the rest of us. Okay, like not like the rest of us. So his role is to sacrifice everything to realize the specific gifts that's inside of himself, in order to then realize like that full potential. And for him, that's winning NBA championships and scoring titles and being a global superstar that
Hmm.
inspires other people to shoot their garbage at a waste paper basket and say Kobe, right? Because we understand it's greatness and we want to emulate greatness, we want to touch greatness, right?
Yeah, I just
we
want
want
to just touch the surface of what he's been able to
to
accomplish and everything, or
we
just
want to
anyone,
approach
whether it be. hockey players or I mean that's again as you alluded to earlier, is that's why people wear their someone else's name on the back of their shoulders and things like
That's right.
that. It's because of that, because they want to be like that.
There's this real legend idea to it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's great, but we have to understand what they sacrifice. Like, what does the professional sacrifice? Well,
Right.
your body. That's the number one thing they sacrifice their body. Professional athletes don't retire as these paragons of health. They're battered and broken and beaten down people. Like,
Right.
like how many boxers live into their 60s? Like very few,
Yeah.
if any. Like there's this willing trade-off. So we understand that they are giving something of great value away in order to achieve something of immense meaning to them. And we don't just like it when the athlete like, oh, well, I did all this just so I could get the bag. It's like, no, we want to see the athlete who's like, I desire to win. Like I have this passion to be the best. Um, so we want all that to line up. But if we're not professionals, right, and the vast majority of us are not, we never will be. What are we utilizing this for? Like, is it okay for us to destroy our personal relationships? Is it okay for us to wreck our bodies? Maybe just a little bit, right? Because we got to push. But it's for us, it's like if the training doesn't make you a better person in the other areas of your life, you're doing it wrong because your priorities are wrong and you're making the incorrect sacrifices, and you make the incorrect sacrifices time and time and time again, and that does just leads you to a place of meaninglessness, like nihilism,
Yeah.
depression. It's bad. You don't want to make the wrong sacrifices. So we really focus on the training filling us up to allow us to become better in all of the other roles that we have to fulfill throughout the day: father, husband, wife, like sibling, employee, boss,
Mhm.
entrepreneur, spiritually, community leader, like whatever it is. The training has to fill us up with the right kinds of moral character so that we can then go and fulfill our other obligations to much more of a higher degree. So that's that, going back to that idea of athletic training that's going to implicitly rise me up, that the ancient Greeks were talking about, as opposed to just, well, I'm going to get into the gym and I'll lift more than you, and because I'm stronger and can beat you up, I get to tell you what to do.
I was gonna say that never really works well because you're just gonna be resented in the end, like, and eventually you just find yourself gonna be alone, honestly. And I've seen people with one call it ego lifting, where they're trying to do like a press, and all of a sudden the weight's really like this versus like this, and I mean you see it all, or you see someone just throwing off their back, and you will like kind of want to say something because you're gonna throw your back. You're doing this like row motion, and it doesn't do anything, and so one of the most important things you can do, and this is what I found effective, is just like, hey, can I give you some piece of advice? They say yes, cool. They say no, all right, see you later. Have a good day. Don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but the
exactly.
thing is, it's all about coming together. And that's why I really like your message today. It's just like, let's come together. Let's do it for the love of sports. Let's do it because we can get better through our bodies, our minds, because our minds, if our mind's like, you can't run past that, it's like, well, I just did. Now my spirit is like, really telling the mind, listen, this is what we don't tell me what I can and can't do. Because as we all know, the mind is a trickster. The mind is based on comfort and it doesn't like strenuous activity. You have to really train it to enjoy it. And it's a whole mental process that you always are going to be working on. It's not a one and done thing because you're going to overcome something. It's like, oh no, can I do this? Well, I look at the past. Yeah, I've overcome stuff, but this feels different.
Definitely. There's no lying about it. There's no lying. That's the thing, is the mind can do anything it needs to in the world of abstractions, right?
Yeah,
It's not necessarily tethered to reality. You get to figure out the ways in which you can tether it to reality. And the mind is so powerful that it will just twist up all those knots. But the body, nah. The only knots you get are the ones in your muscles from overusing them.
that's true. Well, plus we could, in a way, we can feel when the muscle gets tight or we get a spasm. We can kind of feel in the brain where your mind kind of can downward spiral, or you're thinking a lot of negative thoughts, or you're just like almost like the clinical word would be rumination, where you're always thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah,
And almost like repeat it, and you repeat the scene. You can remember the taste, the smell, the clothes you were wearing, and you
yeah.
just like keep festering it. So one way, that's why any therapist, any mental health provider will say basically, or any coach would really say, go for a walk, go for a run, because that way you get out of your head, get out of your mind, you change your environment. And when we get more in tune with nature, the more calmer we relax. When we see all the buildings and when we see so much of what we want to do that feels out of reach, it just get down on ourselves for it. Versus, listen, if you want to be that way, if you want to be like the Kobe Bryant or the Shaquille O'Neals, you may not have that energy level. You just have to kind of learn how to accept what are some of your limitations. You may
You
not
mean,
be able to do an Ironman, but can you do a Spartan race?
is there something out there for you? You
Yeah,
know, like that's why my biggest piece of advice for people, both inside our tribe, but also the people that I coach and just the people that I talk to and message out to, um, your foundation has to be love. You know, you talked about this idea of discipline, and you can eventually resent discipline. It's like, yeah, because we've all been bullied. We've all been
hmm,
just told, do this or else, right? That can be like your parent, or that can
right,
be like that mean gym coach or that awful teacher, right? Who just threatens you with more homework if you don't do the thing that they want. And
right.
does that get results? Yeah, of course it gets results. Right? Fear is an excellent motivator,
Oh yeah,
but it creates resentment inside of the individual, and you're not appreciative of the role that that authority figure played in your life. You're like, well, yeah, they made me do stuff, but it wasn't my best. I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I actually don't really like that person. So now think about how most people internally discipline themselves when it comes to fitness. They're like the, hey, fat man, get off the couch. Like, otherwise you're going to be more fat. Like, hey, like you're weak if you don't finish this set. It's all this negative bullying discipline where it's like
right.
punish, punish. And let's be real, we need that sometimes. I'm not saying there's not a place for that. But what I tend to see in the fitness world is people are bringing only that kind of motivation or only that kind of discipline, and
Yeah,
that's only going to work for so long. There's a very small set of people who can actually have that motivation be a positive driving force in their lives forever. These are like, that's a very small amount of
yeah. No,
person.
it is. It's yeah. I never appreciate when I see people like, hey, you shouldn't be fat or big, right? You know, if you're part of this community or you go to this, what have you, it's like, that's just shame, and that's gonna make people eat more, feel terrible. They're gonna try to lose weight, but then they're gonna maybe lose a few pounds, then gain it back, and it's never productive. It's more like you said, it's that bullying, like, yeah, don't be fat, but the person has an issue with their thyroid, and we know when people have issues with their thyroid, it causes them to gain weight, or they have another medical issue. Or one show that really kind of opened up my eyes is My 600 Pound Life,
Hmm.
and you hear how about, and I met a few guys doing the podcast and things like that who had abuse growing up, and they saw food as comfort. That was like the one thing that helped them get through life.
Yep.
So until you take time to understand what someone goes through, then you have to be careful when you get to that being that critical or judgmentalness, because you don't know what someone goes through unless they tell you.
A 1,000%, right? And for those people internally, like, what do you think it looks like for them? Like, that's not a nice place inside of their brains when they're trying to motivate themselves to do something they know they need to do, but it's extraordinarily difficult, and they're not going to get a lot of, we'll say, like, credit. They're not going to get a lot of social
Yeah,
credit for doing that. They're going to get a lot of like, you should have been doing this 10 years ago. What's wrong with you? Like,
yeah,
like, or don't even try. You're too big. You're never going to make it. Like, it's just so bad. So yeah, there's the external pressure, but also this negative internal bullying. So then what lasts, right? If that's not going to last, which it doesn't, and you can see this from the statistics. It's like people know
hmm,
that exercise is good for their health. Nobody does it. Okay. Why?
right,
Like, why? Okay. All right. That's more of an interesting question. And part of it is because negative motivation runs out. And that's the only thing that people can generally turn to in order to get themselves back in. And it's usually this utilitarian argument where it's like, shoot, I need to lose whatever amount of pounds so that I can get off, blood pressure medication or
Right.
that's right. That's right. But that's rational. And guess what? We don't make decisions with the rational mind. We make
You
decisions
really
with,
don't.
yeah, of course we don't. We make decisions with the emotional heart, right? And with the wise gut, right? So we need this heart gut access, pardon me, to lead the way. So
Right.
that's why I say love. Love's got to be the foundation. And why? Well, number one, you're gonna have interest and passion. But number two, love is what allows you to willingly sacrifice. Love is what allows you to willingly go through adversity. If you just think about the love a parent has for a child and what they
Hmm.
willingly give away in order to provide for the child, that's the kind of authority and discipline we want to be bringing to ourselves. It's like the wise patriarch who's gentle but firm. He
You
can
got
be
my favorite line
mean.
right there.
He can be mean when required because he's calling out the truth of your excuses or your weakness or your lying, but then is also reassuring,
Yeah.
comforting, supporting, graceful, right? Right? Forgiving, but also like demanding of a standard. That's how we want to discipline ourselves internally. And that only comes from love. Like the best parents do it from love, where it's like, I know it would be really easy if you and I were best buds and I never had to do anything that made you unhappy, but then I'm just a very bad parent. So I actually have to do the thing like, whatever, you're watching a TV, boom, it's got to go off now. Or, oh, you want candy for dinner. Guess we ain't eating no candy for dinner. It's like
Yeah.
obvious
You know,
thing.
it's like, well, you're thinking when you're 20 and you're healthy and you have control and especially with impulses and everything
It,
else.
yeah, that delayed gratification allows you it allows you to sacrifice, allows you to go through the adversity. It allows you to sacrifice the convenience and the expediency of the easy answer, whatever that is. And
Right.
it tilts you towards like, okay, we're going to go do the hard thing because the hard thing is the thing that's right and necessary and good. And it's clear to me what I need to do, but it still don't make it easy. Still don't make it easy.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well,
that's
it's
why we
kind of like
need
the
love.
reverse
That's
of
why we need
college,
love.
right?
Sorry, go.
With college telling you, go ahead, have your dessert first.
You can. It's just like,
You
what the
can. I mean, they say, hey, guess what? Your parents aren't here. Do whatever you want.
and that's what people do. That's what people
And
do with
that's
their
what,
bodies. They just
exactly.
have
Well,
dessert.
that's,
They had dessert first forever.
yeah. So I gotta say, Jordan, I really love this conversation that we had. We'll have to do it again. But as we kind of wrap up today, what do you, in like in a minute, what would you like to leave off with someone today?
I would say the best way for you to realize the true value of sports to its best potential would be to use these words as anchors. So these should be your primary aim. So it doesn't mean we are going to forget about the numbers or the objective results or
Hmm.
anything like that. I'm not saying get rid of that. That's ridiculous. I'm saying these should come first. Love, joy, passion, creativity, imagination, individuality, spirit. If you just focus on those words and how they relate to you, to your situation, how you want to make those alive within the motions and movements of your body that are intense, that force you into a present moment of needing to overcome a bit of resistance, you're going to unlock an entirely new world, both of the enjoyment of physical training, but
Hmm.
also this deep ability to start transferring the lessons that you learn in the body to the mind and ultimately to the spirit, which some people think they know how to do and will say, but I would suggest they do not. And that in order to fully realize this, because there's a lot of people that say you can't. There's a lot of people that say you can't actually do
Right.
it, and you're kind of fooling yourself and deluding yourself. And honestly, I think the vast majority of people that try fall into that category because they don't understand the nature of the activity, they don't understand the depth of the activity, and they don't understand how to realize its full value when you're actually doing the activity. So if you want to do that, again, the primary words, the anchors, broad things to think about: love, passion, joy, creativity, imagination, spirit. And then just go move your body in beautiful ways, friends. That's it.
Well, go anchor yourself into Jordan's stellar advice and go follow him on Twitter. All the social platforms will be in the description below with the travel training. And just remember, take in from this podcast and do one of the 7 things he mentioned. If you want to focus on love, focus on love. Focus on creativity, focus on creativity. So the challenge to you, the call of action is to pick one thing and go and do it, because that's how you get better. You go out and you do it. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and have a blessed day.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks so much.